Hello and welcome to Owning the Narrative. I am McBulow. The show will feature the top news of the week, complete with my observations, and even a little bit of sarcasm thrown in. The top news stories will be taken from my morning news briefings that I write on the Rick Bulow New Media blog every weekday morning. If you go on to like what you see, smash that thumbs up button. And now, let's go right into the news. In the aftermath of the riots on Wednesday, there are still other things going on. As a matter of fact, BLM and Antifa attacked a female journalist in New York City, yet the police stand by and do nothing. Got this from the Gateway Pundit and Christina Layla. Antifa domestic terrorists marched through the streets of New York City on Sunday, claiming to own the public space, chanting "Our blanking streets." Blank the Cowboys, Antifa members shouted in anticipation of a rumored MAGA march on Columbus Square. Antifa goons surrounded a police journalist, or female journalist, on 25th and Broadway, hit her with umbrellas and knocked her cam out of her hand. The left-wing terrorist threw eggs on the woman's head as she screamed for help. And there's a tweet from Polish American Brotherhood. Footage caught across of when I was trying to get away and I'm screaming to get off me. They hitting me with the umbrella and then knocked my equipment. When I picked it up, they smashed the egg and hit me in the head and they knocked my phone off. I've been spat on, I've been punched, I've been threatened, the woman said. Polish American Brotherhood again tweeted out, running to the cops for help. They tell me she's a Nazi part of the Polish American Brotherhood. The woman ran to NYPD for help after she was violently attacked, and they told her to stay 6 feet away from them and let her be attacked. Just watch. And Polish American Brotherhood said, I ran to the hashtag NYP for help. They told me to stay 6 feet from them and let me be attacked. Antifa BLM terrorists called the woman a Nazi and threatened her, I'm going to knock you out. And Polish American Brotherhood in another tweet said, attacked at a BLM Antifa NYC rally, smashed egg in my head, hit with umbrella, spat on, knocked with a skateboard as the crowd says, don't protect her, she's for Trump. There are videos in there, very, very disturbing videos. I'm not going to play them here. But, yeah, I mean, and it's amazing how the media and, the legacy media had excused the violence by the left-wing activists. As a matter of fact, there's this from the Federalist. 28 times media and Democrats excuse violence by left-wing activists. This is a long one, so I'll just highlight them all. But however, I will read the opening few paragraphs. Democrats and their allies in the media are ready to condemn riots now that the turmoil has shifted to fit their narrative. On Wednesday, a mob of Trump protesters stormed the U.S. Capitol building. It was an astonishing display of anarchic protest that delayed congressional certification of the Electoral College vote, formally handing former Vice President Joe Biden the keys to the White House. The scenes from the dark day of disaster demonstrations illustrated a deteriorating country repulsed millions and traumatized a nation still recovering from the death, despair, and disruption that came to define the dystopian months of 2020. Above all, what happened Wednesday served as a grim reminder that the institutional stress test of 2020 has followed us into 2021. Laura Bicker tweeted out that there was an incredible pick by Reuters. For the left, however, the chaos at the Capitol has opened an opportunity to refute the perception that they own the monopoly on widespread political violence. Democrats and left-wing media elites have already capitalized on the violent outbreak, where 4 people died, to characterize conservatives as the creatures of chaos. Now, at this point, it's undeniable that the political far right calls home to its own Antifa-like anarchists. It's also undeniable, however, that reaction to the protests from conservative leaders roundly condemning the violence from their own side stands in remarkable contrast to the way Democrats and corporate media spend months going out of their way attempting to justify the deadly actions of militant leftists. Now, one prominent conservative pundit or politician with any significant platform was reported to have tied endorsing the mob of Trump supporters infiltrating the U.S. Capitol. To the contrary, conservatives spent months vilifying Democrat leaders for not doing enough in their own states and cities to crack down on the militant mobs of leftists taking streets under siege, normalizing the kind of political violence on track to appear routine in the nightmare 2020 decade. Remember, it was only 7 months ago that Washington, D.C. was last on fire. Greg Price tweeted out on January 6th, reminder that our nation's capital looked like this at the beginning of the summer, and most Democrats/media shrugged it off as mostly peaceful. A trip down memory lane chronicling the left's reaction to last year's eruption of unrest, claiming the lives of at least 30 people not only exposes the hypocrisies of accusing Democrats' condemnation of political violence, but also illustrates a sobering reality that there is plenty of blame to go around for the situation in which the United States now finds itself. Number one, Kamala Harris urges followers to cover rioters' ball. And it said that Harris encouraged her supporters last summer to donate to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which sent bail money to the militant anarchists facing charges for setting fire to Minneapolis. Number two, Chris Cuomo, who said protests were supposed to be peaceful. CNN's Chris Cuomo showcased his ignorance of the First Amendment in June when dismissing the idea that militant protests sweeping the nation in the aftermath of George Floyd's death were illegal. He demanded to know where it says protesters were supposed to be polite and peaceful, and it was in the First Amendment as tweeted out by Steve Guest, where it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free speech thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Number three, MSNBC reporter describes fiery scene as mostly a protest. MSNBC's Ali Velshi stood in front of a liquor store burning behind him in Minneapolis and called the riot surrounding the camera crew mostly a protest that is not, generally speaking, unruly. But fires have been started, Velshi made clear to quote. Number four, CNN labels burning protests fiery but mostly peaceful. And this was in Kenosha, Wisconsin as its focal point. After the label fiery but mostly peaceful had become a trolling phrase online to describe legacy media's coverage of the summer riots, the network literally adopted the words to describe events unfolding in Kenosha while a reporter standing in front of several burning vehicles. Number five, Democratic National Convention refuses to condemn the riots, going through their entire online convention without condemning the epidemic of left-wing violence that engulfed the nation in the preceding months. Number six, Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times writer destroying property as in violence. Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is the New York Times' architect of the 1619 Project, explicitly rejected the idea that destroying property fits the definition of violence. And she also said that it would be an honor for the 2020 riots to be deemed the 1619 riots, despite destroying minority businesses. Number seven, government-funded PBS reporter denies anarchists are anarchists. PBS White House correspondent Yemi Chalcendor tried and failed to fact-check President Donald Trump in May, apparently faulting the president for not providing any evidence when calling the anarchists tearing cities anarchists. Number eight, CNN's Don Lemon compares leftist riots to the Boston Tea Party. He celebrated the Floyd riots as a 21st century version of the Boston Tea Party, saying that this is how this country got started. There's a tweet from Brad Baker saying our country was started because the Boston Tea Party rioting, so do not get it twisted and think this is something that has never happened before, and this is so terrible and these savages and all of that. This is how this country was started. Number nine, CNN's Chris Cillizza complains about the term riot. And there's a tweet from Abigail Marone about a picture. Number 10, New York Times columnist finds Portland anarchists in piece titled, Help Me Find Trump's Anarchists in Portland. New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof penned an op-ed in July headlined, Help Me Find Trump's Anarchists in Portland, in which he actually appears to find them. And there's from his piece in the tree from Gerald Byer, sure there are anarchists and Antifa activists in the Portland protests, just as there are radiologists and electricians, lawyers and mechanics. MSNBC's Joy Reid, BLM riots are really just undercover white nationalists causing trouble. You can see the tweet there from her. Number 12, the Huffington Post releases a video headlining how riots built America. Huffington Post published a brief women-in mini-documentary outlining how riots built America to draw parallels between the 2020 riots against police with periods of unrest against throughout America, against, against police with periods of unrest throughout American history. Number 13, NBC News allegedly instructed staff to avoid the term riot. Greg Melvin tweeted it out saying that it's most accurate at this time to describe what's happening there as protests, not riots. Number 14, Seattle Mayor on anarchists taking control of downtown. Don't be afraid of democracy. Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan written fire on Trump in June when the protests demanded an end to the city's partial occupation by socialist protesters. Seattle is fine, Durkan wrote on Twitter, despite the insurgency. Don't be so afraid of democracy. Ironically, number 15, Washington governor was unaware of Seattle occupation. Washington Democrat Governor Jay Inslee was caught being completely oblivious to the anarchist insurrection taking over his state's largest city when he was asked about the rogue militia during a coronavirus press briefing. Number 6, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi just shrugged when asked about a militant mob tearing down the statue of legendary explorer Christopher Columbus in Baltimore in June 2020. People will do what they do, she said, shrugging. And she had a completely different reaction on Wednesday at the sight of a random Trump anarchist lounging around her own office. Number 17, Rolling Stone republishes article to rethink property destruction. And it said that the historical pedigree of property destruction as a tactic of resistance is long and frequently objective. The authors wrote back in 2014, or back in 2014. GQ magazine runs protest work. GQ magazine published a lengthy feature in June amid the Florida Floyd riots, headlined by violent protest work. Number 19, Slade riots, a proportionate response. Slade magazine ran a piece amid the Floyd riots, justifying the chaos, ripping the nation's cities apart, titled Proportionate Response. Number 20, Mother Jones said riots are irrational. That was in mid-June. And also in June, Time magazine posted a headline or a piece that was headlined A War of Words by describing the George Floyd riots or protests as riots is so loaded. Number 22, Vox woke riots are scary but productive. Capitol riots were devastating. Cam Edwards tweeted out, "You can't govern a nation with two sets of rules." James Lindsay tweeted a pic out for number 23. New York Times has sympathy for BLM riots while blaming Trump as a sole perpetrator for the Wednesday mob. 24. Jacobin magazine, looting is justified only for social justice. It also published a piece headlined When Rioting Works in June. AOC 25, the whole point of protesting is to make people uncomfortable. This is what Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, America, New York, said about rioting in December 2020. Her staff began trying to get Twitter to stop people from retweeting images of this in the wake of the Wednesday riots. And number 26, author writes book titled In Defense of Looting. And earned a feature in National Public Radio for the work. The book is entitled In Defense of Looting by Vicky Osterweil. Number 27, NPR guest. Floyd riots are acts of rebellion, not riots. University professor Mac Lamont Hill went on NPR complaining that dismissing the protesters as rioters dehumanizes them, impeding political progress. And number 28, NPR makes up right-wing violence. Stephen L. Miller tweeted out with a hat tip from at Tim Rence's mouth. NPR versus reality. Now, I for one am totally against any form of rioting. I mean, even though Thomas Jefferson said that when the government fears the people, there is liberty. Where the people fear the government, there is tyranny. That is true, and another quote is also true. I don't know right off the top of my head who had said this, but the tree of liberty needs to be watered frequently with the blood of tyrants and patriots. So, and I mean, who knows just what is going to happen over the next, well, 9 days until Biden is inaugurated, but pretty much over the next weeks and years to come. I mean, I, it's it's just mind blowing what's happening, and I just pretty much that's all I can say about that. However, Mark Levin had posted something rather interesting, or said something interesting on Life, Liberty, and Levin yesterday. Mark Levin, media is exploiting violence by thugs on Capitol Hill to silence conservatives. Conservative radio and television host Mark Levin blasted the mainstream media for trying to silence conservatives and Republicans by exploiting last week's violence at the U.S. Capitol building. In a blistering monologue on Fox News, the host of Life, Liberty, and Levin called out the huge role the media has played in what has unfolded in the nation, rebuking their projection as he shared one shocking headline after another in his more than 13-minute segment. Warning, anything I say this evening will be used to attack me by the press, the Democrat Party, and the never Trumpists, but I don't care. I always try to speak the truth, and I want to talk to you tonight. It's a very important time in our history, Levin began on Sunday's program. The conservative author denounced the outrageous events at the Capitol last week as hoodlums breached the walls and security of the building. He noted that hundreds of thousands of people came out to rally in support of President Donald Trump, and now they're all being accused of violence. They're all being attacked. They're all being painted with the brightest of brushes, Levin added. Why can't we focus on the people who actually did this? We need to find out who they are. We need to prosecute them. We need to know all about them. Why is that so controversial? He noted that he listened again to Trump's speech ahead of the chaos and reiterated that not once did he incite violence. Levin went on to recount a view as how awful the last 5 years had been as the attacks on Trump never ceased. Even before he was sworn into office, as Democrats were day in and day out on TV accusing our president of espionage and all kinds of horrific acts, treason, selling out the dictators. This has an impact on the society. It has an impact on the people, he continued, accusing the media of playing a leading role and going on to headline examples of the attack on the American system of government. All forms of violence, all of which should be condemned, and I condemn it all, and I have always condemned it all, but everybody hasn't, he said, noting that the media had played a huge role in what's going on in this country. We need to reject all this violence, but what about the media? He asked as he shared the front pages of several newspapers from around the nation. New York Times, Trump incites mob, this is projection, Levin declared, reading the headline. This is projection, he never did that. Or the Washington Times, or the Washington Post, Trump mob storms Capitol. There were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people there. That's an awfully broad brush, he added. Or the New York Daily News, President incites insurrection, or USA Today. Pro-Trump mob storm U.S. Capitol. How about thugs storm U.S. Capitol? How about lawbreakers storm U.S. Capitol? We should not downplay what happened on Capitol Hill the other day. We should be furious about what happened on Capitol Hill the other day. But either you're against violence or you're not. he said, calling out Representative Adam Kinzinger, Republican of Illinois, and Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer from New York, who are also explaining the situation. They're talking about impeaching the president with the 25th Amendment 9 days before he leaves office, the host said. Do they even know what's involved in the 25th Amendment? So they double down, they triple down, they quadruple down. They're not going to change. On one side of their mouth, they talk about unity. On the other side of their mouth, they spit on people living contended, adding that 74 million people voted, or 74 million Trump voters are not going away. Their concerns still exist. He slammed Democrats, calling out House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who eliminated 100 years of tradition by trying to pass a rules package, making it virtually impossible for Republicans to even propose legislation or demand legislation, even though she only has a 10 or 11% majority in the House. The goal of Democrats, Levin argued, is to choke the system even further. Meanwhile, the media are trying to intimidate conservatives and constitutionalists by projecting onto them the violence that occurred by reprobates and others who need to be tracked down and punished, he said. So it seems that the lessons have not been learned, Levin concluded. They certainly haven't been learned by the left, they certainly haven't been learned by the media, and they certainly have not been learned by the never-Trumpers. Mark Levin is totally right there. I mean, and Levin is a constitutionalist. He's a supporter of the Convention of States, which I'm definitely going to double, triple, and even quadruple down on with this because Washington Washington D.C. cannot rein itself in. There needs to be something else that can rein in Washington D.C., and that is through Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, where Congress, upon two-thirds of the states, can call for a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments. I mean, that is basically the only way that things can be worked out and done now. You know, otherwise we're just going to keep seeing articles like this, and Washington D.C. is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it turns out that the Democrats were actually for rights before they were against them. This coming from Daniel Greenfield from Front Page Mag. In 2018, the media was writing up glowing stories about the hundreds of Women's March members who were engaging in direct action to disrupt the Senate's Kavanaugh hearings. Hundreds of members from the radical leftist group had invaded the hearings and were arrested. Their travel expenses and bail for their disruptions were covered by the Women's March. Radicals from the March and other leftist groups blocked hallways, shouted down Senate members, and draped protest banners from balconies. Democrats cheered them on. When a leftist mob assailed the Supreme Court, pounding on the doors, MSNBC called it an extraordinary moment and praised the crowd besieging the Supreme Court and confronting senators. If you see anyone from that cabinet in a restaurant and in a department store and a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them, Representative Maxine Waters had urged earlier that year. Later, the Democrat House member told MSNBC they're going to absolutely harass them. In 2020, Black Lives Matter rioters vandalized the Lincoln Memorial and the World War II Memorial, along with statues of Gandhi, General Kosciuszko, and Andrew Jackson. The racist thugs marched through the city, starting fires, including at a historic church, and tried to besiege the White House. Attempts by federal law enforcement to fight BLM terrorism were falsely denounced as a brutal attack on peaceful protesters and as militarism and fascism. Democrat House members took to proposing bills to protect the racist mobs from law enforcement. Meanwhile, the BLM mob besieged the White House and battled Secret Service personnel, allegedly forcing the evacuation of President Trump and his family to a bunker. This was a new normal enthusiastically supported by Democrats and the media. A bail fund backed by Senator Kamala Harris inviting campaign staffers focused on helping the rioters and looters get out of prison, along with any other criminals along for the ride. Violent protests, including those targeting public officials and legislative bodies, have been championed and normalized by Democrats and their media over the last 4 years. That included the harassment of officials, property destruction, and insulting law enforcement. Now, as the Democrats expect to take power, they suddenly decided the rioting is bad. Before the Save America protests even began, the same Washington, D.C. authorities who had championed and protected the Black Lives Matter riots prepared for a crackdown. We want the military, we want troops from out of state, out of Washington, D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser had ranted when the BLM was attacking national memorials in the White House. We will not allow people to incite violence, intimidate our residents, or cause destruction in our city, Bowser now insisted, demanding that the National Guard come out to stop the protests. Unless they're Democrats, you failed to mention. D.C. Attorney General Carl Racine had responded to the Black Lives Matter assault by condemning law enforcement. He issued a statement falsely accusing President Trump of responding to nonviolent demonstration with warlike tactics. We, the mayor, the council, the OAG, and the MPD, must commit to standing in between our community and the boot of tyranny, and we must act on this commitment. We must start by promising to defend our residents from harm while they engage in peaceful, nonviolent protest. My level of anxiety is high. My preparation is even more intense than that. Racine was telling the media before the pro-Trump Save America rally now. The double standard was obvious and blatant. The Democrats and media had cheered Black Lives Matter violent protests. They had colluded in previous invasions of Congress and the harassment of elected officials, but now they wanted a violent riot they could condemn. And such a riot would hopefully put to bed any further questions about a rigged election. After a massive peaceful rally by Save America protesters who had been arrested by President Trump, a smaller group marched on Washington. The MPD, however, reacted very differently than it had to previous Black Lives Matter and 4 years of leftist rallies. In the resulting confrontation, a number of fringe elements, neo-Nazis, rapers, Boogaloo Boys, a leftist libertarian anarchist group that collaborates with Antifa and Black Lives Matter, took the opportunity to cause riot damage and stage photo ops for the media. Unfortunately, some legitimate conservative protesters who entered the building were caught in violence. But the media stars of the confrontation were not conservatives and were anti-Trump. One photo showed Tim Baked Alaska Jane, a former Black Lives Matter supporter and BuzzFeed employee who has a history of going back and forth between the alt-right and the left, and has circulated at Goy for alt-right events. Another appeared to show Matthew Heimbach, formerly with the National Socialist Movement, an alleged neo-Nazi leader, who had previously argued in court that his actions were President Trump's fault and that Trump should be held legally liable. Much as in Charlottesville, marginal figures who were hostile to President Trump, to Republicans and to conservatives, had taken center stage at the behest of the media. The purpose of the entire circus was to provide a propaganda opportunity for the left. The outrage over the protests is a farce coming from a political movement that advocated terrorizing Republican elected officials, that aided invasions of Congress, and that supported the Black Lives Matter riots, which, aside from terrorizing D.C., also wreaked much of the country. Why is broken glass on Capitol Hill so much more present than the broken glass that ended the dreams of store owners in Kenosha? Where is all the violence? The tears wept for our country when Black Lives Matter thugs were prying open shops around the country, looting them, and assaulting their owners on a scale so vast that it racked up $2 billion with a B $1 billion in damage. Please show me where it says peace protesters are supposed to be polite and peaceful. CNN's Chris Cuomo had barked while his news network showed rioting and looting in New York. Riots are obviously wrong, except that Democrats and the media decided that wasn't true. Martin Luther King's infamous quote, "A riot is the language of the unheard," popped up in Time, USA Today, and on CNN. While this was critical to the success of the 1960s civil rights movement, a Washington Post op-ed argued, the AP urged reporters to use uprising instead of riot to describe the violence, while suggesting that protests can be violent and that reporting should not focus on the property destruction, but instead on the underlying grievance. A subsidiary of one of the big five publishers put out a book entitled "In Defense of Looting." You can't normalize political violence and then expect it to be a one-sided affair. After months in which BLM mobs attacked the federal courthouse in Portland, throwing fireworks and shedding lasers in the eye of law enforcement officials, toppled statues across the country, and injured thousands of police or hundreds of police officers, the Democrats and the media are suddenly outraged. How, in the midst of all this rioting, could anyone get the idea that rioting is okay? Laws only work when they apply to everyone. When violence is okay for some but not for others, Then a violent struggle ensues until a totalitarian monopoly on violence is achieved, or until we come to our senses. Now, there's little question as to what side of the political spectrum has championed and mainstream violence for over a century. The very different fate of Kluxers and the Weathermen, trailer parks for the former and academic careers for the latter, show which side finds political violence is not only acceptable but praiseworthy, and that is no different. Contrary to the media spin, Republicans have never normalized violence, and Republican political power doesn't depend on political terror and violence. Leftist power invariably does. The left began a new age of political violence in 2016. It can turn it off anytime it wants to. The problem is that it won't, and an illiberal partisan media and accompanying cultural establishment will never dare to suggest that maybe there should be fewer rising threats. And that means that the violence will escalate. Opportunists will seize a moment to play agent provocateurs, creating memorable images for the media propagandists to justify a crackdown. The protesters in D.C. had a legitimate grievance, and they still do. Their outrage over stolen elections won't be suppressed this way. The mass movement in D.C. is a true resistance. There is a great deal of irony in quoting a riot as the language of the unheard to describe the race riots of a movement with unlimited political and corporate backing, whose message is heard all the time, but not to address a movement that is generally unheard. Before the fighting started, there was virtually no media coverage of Trump's speech in the rally. Press conferences that mention election fraud are aired. Articles and videos questioning the election are censored. That is the true voice of the unheard who are more than ever. Democrats and the media normalized violence when they were in the opposition and now want to normalize the suppression of political protests and speech as they expect to take power. But media spin isn't real life, and it's a lot easier to break a country than pull it back together. That piece from front page, yeah, that piece from Front Page magazine, which is put out by David Horowitz, who used to be a violent radical leftist, is also very true there. I mean, we need to peacefully assemble and redress the government. Like I said, convention of states is one way. And, talk to your representative and senator who represents you in your state district. You know, your local, because politics is always local. So go to them and comment below what you think of the articles. What your take on the whole violence was in DC on the 6th. What do you think is going to happen with Biden in office? And I'll see you in the next video. With only 8 days left in the Trump administration, there is a call for an early ouster of him. Is it feasible? Well, let's take a look at 6 key points from the Daily Signal on the efforts to oust Trump in his final days. After the riot at the Capitol, congressional Democrats increasingly are calling for the removal of President Donald Trump before his term expires January 20th, either through a second impeachment or by invoking the 25th Amendment. Representative Catherine Clark, Democrat of Massachusetts, and Assistant House Speaker, said lawmakers could vote on impeachment within a week. After vowing never to concede the 2020 presidential contest at a rally Wednesday, Trump announced the next day that he is committed to an orderly transition to the presidency of Joe Biden. Theoretically, if Trump were removed from office, it could create 2 historic precedents. First, Trump would be the first president to be impeached twice, and second, if Vice President Mike Pence were to become the 46th president with a term expiring January 20th, it would be the shortest presidential term in American history. President William Henry Harrison died 31 days into his term. Here are 6 things to know about efforts to boot Trump from office before his term ends in less than 2 weeks. Number 1, could opponents use the 25th Amendment? House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat California, and Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer of New York have called for Pence and the Trump cabinet to use the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office. Pelosi said the House could move to impeach Trump if his cabinet didn't act. On Friday, she issued a statement calling for Trump to resign or face impeachment. It is a hope of members that the president will immediately resign, but if he does not, I have instructed the Rules Committee to be prepared to move forward with Congressman Jamie Rankin's 25th Amendment legislation and a motion for impeachment. Accordingly, the House will preserve every motion or option, including the 25th Amendment, a motion to impeach, or a privileged resolution for impeachment. Raskin, a Maryland Democrat, introduced his 25th Amendment legislation in October, but legal experts say the 25th Amendment is not in play in this case, primarily because Pence reportedly has no plans to call the cabinet together to remove Trump. The 25th Amendment wouldn't be applicable here, Ross Gerber, a lawyer who specializes in political investigations and impeachment and teaches at the Tulane Law School, told the Daily Signal. Gerber represented 4 governors who faced state impeachment investigations in Connecticut, South Carolina, Alabama, and Missouri. The 25th Amendment to the Constitution allows for the Vice President and a majority of cabinet secretaries to determine that a president is physically or mentally unfit to carry out the duties of the office. It provides for the Vice President to become acting president on a temporary basis. Congress then could remove the president from office permanently with a two-thirds vote of both the House and Senate. That would be an even higher bar to reach than impeachment, because the latter requires only a simple majority in the House to remove a president, but two-thirds of the Senate. Congress adopted the 25th Amendment in 1967, about 3 years after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The move was based on the concern about what to do while the president was still alive but experiencing a health crisis. The 25th Amendment is for when a president is unable to fulfill the duties of the office for either physical or mental reasons. John Malcolm, director of the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation, told the Daily Signal. I don't think it's appropriate as a matter of constitutional law, added Malcolm. Also, a former deputy assistant district, also a former deputy assistant attorney general in the Justice Department's criminal division. And it's not practical since Pence doesn't plan to invoke the option, he said. Representative Adam Kinzinger, Republican of Illinois, on Thursday became the first GOP lawmaker to call for Trump's removal under the 25th Amendment. It's time to invoke the 25th Amendment and end this nightmare, said Kinzinger, who also said he would back impeaching Trump. Number 2, what would Trump be impeached for? The charges that Democrats most often talk about are sedition and incitement to riot and insurrection, or aiding and abetting a riot or a seditious act. This approach would be different from the House's 2019 impeachment of Trump on 2 articles that did not allege a crime but specified abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. It's not sedition, that would be ridiculous, or aiding and abetting, said Robert Ray, a former independent counsel who investigated President Bill Clinton and was a lawyer for Trump in the 2020 Senate impeachment trial. But an impeachment alleging incitement of a riot or aiding and abetting would not suffer the same defect as the earlier impeachment, Ray told the Daily Signal. At least it would be an alleged crime. A factual basis would be the challenge. The federal statute on sedition defines it as conduct promoting the overthrow of the U.S. government. Both Republicans and Democrats refer to the actions of that broke into the Capitol and overwhelmed police as an insurrection. Federal law defines an insurrectionist as whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto. Federal riot law provides or includes provision on those with intent to incite a riot, or to aid and abet any person in inciting or participating in or carrying out a riot. In Trump's speech Wednesday at the Save America rally before the riot, which many on both sides criticized as inflammatory, the president said at one point, I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. However, Trump also told the crowd, fraud breaks up everything, doesn't it? When you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules. The president also said, we fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. U.S. Capitol Police announced Thursday night that Officer Brian Sicknick, 42, had died of his injuries and that authorities were treating the 12-year veteran's death as a homicide. He was the fifth person to die as a result of the chaos at the Capitol. Twitter, the social media platform that Trump long has used to spread his message, announced late Friday that it had permanently suspended his account due to the risk of further incitement of violence. Heritage's Malcolm said earlier that he didn't want to guess what the House's articles of impeachment would say, but said he thought sedition would be a stretch. I don't think the president was trying to set up a coup to take over the government, but his words were certainly unwise and inflammatory, Malcolm said. Beyond his words at the rally are news reports that the president didn't resist securing the Capitol, and senior Trump administration officials had to go around him to bring in the D.C. National Guard to helping order to the building. A key issue to focus on is what the president did after the riots and whether he refused to deploy forces to secure the Capitol, Garber said. Well, if that's true, it's hard to justify. All impeachment proceedings should be based on whether an office holder poses a danger to the country, the government, or the office, Garber said. That should always be the justification of impeachment, Garber said. It's not to censure or punish. It's meant to protect the country. You can make an argument that the president has enormous power he could exercise in 12 days. Rep. Bill Hanover, Democrat of Minnesota, announced Wednesday that she was drawing up articles of impeachment against Trump. The House impeached Trump on December 18, 2019 on charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress in connection with his telephone conversation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in which the two leaders discussed Biden's son, Hunter Biden, as well as U.S. federal or U.S. military aid. The Senate acquitted Trump on February 5, 2020. Number 3, time expiring for a Senate trial? Although only one Senate Republican, Mitt Romney of Utah, voted to remove Trump in last year's trial, Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska said Friday morning that he would consider supporting articles of impeachment if the House sent them to the Senate. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska also called Friday for Trump to resign. Even if the House impeaches Trump next week, the likelihood that the Senate could or would reconvene in time to hold a trial before Biden's inauguration as president on January 20th seems unlikely, Malcolm said. The House could draft articles of impeachment and vote on it in 12 days, Malcolm said. I don't think there is time for a Senate trial, but Trump could be the first president in American history to be impeached twice. The Senate would have to come back into session to address House charges against Trump. The Senate calendar has a body scheduled to be in recess until January 20th. Still, that early return to Washington is not impossible, Garber said. There is conceivably time to do this. Impeachment doesn't have to be drawn out, he said. Impeachment is intended to be a measure in an emergency. Number 4, so what's the point of impeaching Trump now? Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 of the Constitution says that if a federal official is convicted in an impeachment trial, judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. Legal experts debate whether disqualification from running for future office requires the same two-thirds majority as removal from office, or just a simple majority. It would not be wise to rush an impeachment for the purpose of preventing him from holding office again, and by him from running in 2024, Ray said. That could be something voters could decide. So the House could impeach and the Senate, soon to be under slim Democrat control, could hold a trial even after Trump leaves office. It basically would be to disqualify Trump from running for president again, as many suspect he would do in 2024. So could Trump be impeached after leaving? Precedent goes back to the scandal-plagued Grant administration's Sports Secretary William Belknap suggests that retroactive impeachment could occur. Belknap ran what is now the Defense Department for almost 8 years. In 1876, a House investigation found evidence that he took part in kickbacks and corruption involving a military vendor that paid $20,000 to the War Secretary. On March 2nd, 1876, Belknap resigned from office just minutes before the House was scheduled to impeach him. If he thought that this would preclude impeachment, he was wrong. The House approved 5 articles of impeachment, including one that accused Belknap of criminally discharging his duty as Secretary of War and basically prostituting his high office to his less private gain. The fact that Belknap no longer held office didn't prevent the Senate from holding a trial. On August 1, 1876, a Senate majority voted in favor of all five charges or all five articles of impeachment, well short of the two-thirds required to convict. The former War Secretary was convicted and never prosecuted. Such drama would consume much of Washington if it occurred with Trump, Ray said, and that likely isn't what Biden wants. Is this really how Biden wants to begin his administration, Ray said. It's not really in the country's best interest, and it isn't in the Democrat Party's best interest. Number 6. Could Biden Justice Department charge Trump after he leaves? Well, before the Capitol riot, many on the left claiming for Trump to be prosecuted for something, anything after leaving office. Biden announced this week that he will nominate a federal appeals judge, Merrick Garland of the D.C. Circuit, to be his attorney general. President Barack Obama nominated Garland to the Supreme Court in March of 2016, but the Republican-led Senate declined to consider the nomination with the presidential election just 8 months away. Biden's choice of Garland as Attorney General makes a political prosecution somewhat unlikely, Ray said. Ray secured a plea deal with Bill Clinton just before the 43rd president left office, in which Clinton agreed to surrender his law license and admit to making misleading statements under oath to avoid future prosecution. In the past, the judgment of the Justice Department was to leave well enough alone with former presidents, Ray said. Now, it'll be interesting to see just what happens with the impeachment vote in the House. I think it's coming up either tomorrow or Thursday, but like I say, with 8 more days left in Trump's presidency, anything can and will happen. However, instead of impeachment, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy wants Congress to address 4 other areas. This is coming from townhall.com and Beth Bauman. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican California, on Monday sent a letter to the Republican caucus about the Democrats' plans to impeach President Donald Trump. Earlier in the day, House Democrats brought forward 1 article of impeachment against Trump for inciting an insurrection. According to McCarthy, the riots that plagued the United States Capitol on Wednesday have rightfully been announced, but action needs to be taken to prevent them from taking place in the future. He wants to see a censure from the House, a bipartisan commission to investigate why the riots took place, reform the Electoral Count Act of 1887, and legislation that will restore Americans' confidence in elections. Below is a full letter. Colleague, this past week has been extremely difficult for our conference and for our nation. We mourn the loss of life, especially the lives of Officer Brian Sicknick and Officer Howard Liebengood of the U.S. Capitol Police. May we continue to pray for their families and loved ones. Having spoken to so many of you, I know we are all taking time to process the events of that day. Please know that I share your grief and your pain. Zip ties were found on staff desks in my office. Windows were smashed in, property was stolen. Those images will never leave us, and I thank our men and women in law enforcement who continue to protect us and are working to bring back the sick individuals who perpetrated these attacks to justice. In the same breath, I have also heard profound resolve from our conference in the face of this evil. From the Dean of the House to our new members who were just sworn in a week ago, you feel an even deeper sense of service and move forward with a renewed clarity of purpose, both for our shared principles and for the future of our nation. Personally, I continue to believe that impeachment at this time would have the opposite effect of bringing our country together when we need America back on a path toward unity and civility. Notwithstanding the Speaker's push towards impeachment, I have heard from members across our conference who have raised at least 4 potential avenues available to the House to ensure that the events of January 6th are rightfully denounced and prevented from occurring in the future. These include, number 1, a resolution of censure under the rules of the House; number 2, a bipartisan commission to investigate the circumstances surrounding the attack; number 3, reforming the Electoral Count Act of 1887; and number 4, legislation to promote voter confidence in future federal elections. I thank the members who have researched and brought forth these concepts. I ask our conference to consider each on their own merits and plan to discuss with all of you during our member meeting later today and ahead of votes in the House this week. We will also hear from Rodney Davis, our ranking Republican on House administration, for an update on the ongoing security posture surrounding the Capitol complex and its employees. As always, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Otherwise, I look forward to our conference getting together later today. Sincerely, Kevin. Even though the House is scheduled to vote on an impeachment on Wednesday, the point is moot, at least when it comes to the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, circulated a memo amongst Republicans about how a potential impeachment trial would work. The Senate isn't scheduled to conduct any official business until January 19. There will be two pro forma sessions, that is, short sessions where very little business actually takes place, on January 12th and 15th. The only way articles of impeachment can be entertained on those days is if all 100 senators are in agreement. Unanimous consent is very, very unlikely. According to McConnell's memo, impeachment proceedings wouldn't begin until after Trump is out of office, should Democrats decide to go that route. Now, I think that House Republican leader McCarthy does bring up a few interesting points there. You know, especially the point about reforming the Electoral Count Act of 1887, which, if I am not mistaken, Trump had already wanted anyway. You know, I mean, also I think Ted Cruz wanted a committee of 5 congressmen, 5 House members, 5 senators, and 5 Supreme Court justices to go through the electoral votes. I say just go for it. You know, that's what needed to be done. And yeah, Democrats kept dragging their feet with that. So anyway, comment below what you think about impeaching Trump. Also, what you think about President or House Republican leader McCarthy's suggestions, and I'll see you in the next one. Over the past few months, there have been a lot of conservatives that have been hounded by big technology of Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. In fact, many of them are even going to alternative social media like Parler, Gab, BitChute, and Rumble. And why is that? Well, outgoing Representative Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii pulls back that curtain. This coming from our good friends over at Red State and Van and Morris. Conservatives have been calling for a reform of tech company power for some time, including the reformation of Section 230. Moreover, politicians talk a big game about coming down on these tech companies, but never really seem to move on their threats or declarations. Ever wonder why? Hawaii Democrat Tulsi Gabbard will tell you. Gabbard sat down with the Daily Caller and revealed just why politicians seem to freeze when it comes to acting against big tech, and the reason is simple and predictable. It all boils down to money. The clip picks up with Gabbard explaining that Google does indeed pick and choose which search results come up at the top of every search, and she experienced that herself during her campaign for president. She then transitioned that to Section 230. What this comes down to is Section 230 gives them this legal immunity because the idea that they are just this neutral platform, kind of like a town square, said Gabbard. This is distinct and different from somebody like the New York Times, for example, or any other major media platform that does not have legal immunity because they're publishers. And they do pick and choose what news stories they publish, what letters do the editors are printed, what kind of op-eds are put on their platform, and they make those decisions knowing they are legally liable. Gabbard noted that these platforms are now acting as publishers as they are now making editorial decisions while maintaining a legal immunity under Section 230. Gabbard then discussed her recent legislation that would reform Section 230, which would remove the broad protections provided by the law and make things a bit more precise and what Silicon Valley giants can get away with. It does seem like a pretty obvious move, so why hasn't it been done yet? Gabbard lets us in on a little Capitol Hill secret. The real reason we should all be asking is, why hasn't it been fixed yet, said Gabbard. Gabbard notes that despite all the committee hearings and big talk, nothing is done. So why? It goes to money, said Gabbard. I've seen it happen, she continued. Google will have a big reception and members of Congress will go and pick up their checks. Facebook will have a big reception and then they'll go and say, hey, where's my check? Daily Caller tweeted out, it goes to money. Google will have a big reception. Members of Congress will go and they'll pick up their checks. Tulsi Gabbard explains why Congress has failed to act on big tech censorship. It's an Occam's razor situation where the simplest answer is usually the right one. As Gabbard reveals, the reason no one is acting on big tech is that the companies are inviting our elected members of Congress into their very deep pockets. This is a massive abuse of power on several levels, and if our elected officials cannot resist the temptation to extra money in their pockets, well, then they need to be removed. That is spot on, so very true. I mean, you know, there is a social media monopoly out there. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, the big three of social media. They want to control everything, and that's why I had just heard earlier this week that Amazon and Google Apps and the Apple Play Store have taken Powder off of their platforms. So I mean, even big tech is censoring free speech and and conservatives. As a matter of fact, there's this from Fox News. It says YouTube suspends Trump ability to upload content indefinitely. YouTube said Tuesday it had removed content from Donald Trump's official channel and will prevent videos from being uploaded for a minimum of a week. The company, which is owned by Google, said the decision was made after review and in light of concerns about the ongoing potential for violence in the wake of a pro-Trump riot that breached the Capitol on January 6. Given the ongoing concerns about violence, we will also be disabling comments on President Trump's channel, as we've done to other channels where there are safety concerns found in the comments section, YouTube added. Authorities in Washington, D.C. have reported credible threats of further violence related to President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration next week. YouTube's decision follows other tech companies like Twitter and Facebook, which have permanently or temporarily disabled Trump's accounts after Wednesday's riots. YouTube, which didn't explain the content of the offending video, said it was the account's first strike. Now, as far as that being the account's first strike, I've had a couple of friends who have had strikes on their YouTube pages or on their YouTube accounts for not political. As a matter of fact, there is one person who plays a card game called WWE Supercard. It's on Google Play and the Apple App Store, and he's been harassed by many people and has basically had a few strikes on his account to the point that he made that I think he made another separate YouTube account. But I mean, that is a problem that many people are having with big tech, is that Facebook's, Twitter, Google, they're all getting too big for their shoes, and they just need to be broken up. I mean, it's just my opinion, but I think they need to be broken up. And let me know in the comment section below if, if you think likewise. And in other news, these riots are just a way for the Democrats to consolidate their power. Got this from thefederalist.com. Democrats are using the recent Capitol riot to consolidate power. The Capitol Hill riot was an inexcusable, pathetic, and disgraceful display. Its consequences will extend well beyond the bloodshed and property damage inflicted by those who shamefully acceded to the left's view that force is legitimate means of persuasion, exhibited repeatedly via the left's normalization of political incitement and violence throughout President Trump's term in office. The riot not only overshadowed the corruption that marked the 2020 election and undermined the MAGA movement's people and power and principles, but set up Americans of all political stripes for an onslaught on their rights and cherished freedoms. The riot was an accelerant for what was already likely planned under Democrat rule in Washington, crushing dissenters from its leftist orthodoxy as part of an effort to achieve total power by disenfranchising the opposition. President Trump has personified this dissent, but the effort to delegitimize, deplatform, and ultimately destroy him and anyone around him is merely the opening scene of the Godfather-like setting of scores with all who threaten the ruling class's power and privilege. This effort will directly harm not just the thousands of peaceful patriots who are descended on Washington, D.C., and their tens of millions of like-minded neighbors across the country, but all Americans. The coming crackdown on dissenters in the political realm was preordained in the wee hours of January 6, when both Georgia's Senate seats flipped to the Democrats. Now, should Senate Democrats successfully blow up the filibuster, they will work to pass an agenda in which any one item, let alone all, could put Democrats in a virtually unshakable control of the federal government for years to come. They have made no secret of their agenda, which includes such items as mass amnesty for illegal aliens, statehood for Washington, D.C., statehood for Puerto Rico, and federal enshrinement of mail in voting through a re upped H.R. 1. Needless to say, total leftist political control will erode liberty and justice and be used to target dissenters in cruel and unusual ways. In the near term, the Capitol Hill riot has served as a pretext for the corrosive political acts, calls for the 25th Amendment to remove a sitting president, a second impeachment vote, consultations between the Senator or Speaker of the House and the Pentagon about preventing the president from accessing the nuclear codes and discharging his other duties, and calls by our national security and legal apparatus against conservatives in their speech, all under the pretense of combating domestic journalism and punishing incitement. This is not purely an issue of politics, but it will encompass all of civil society. The coming assault on dissenters will play out in arenas that far transcend our increasingly unrepresentative government. Its adjuncts in big tech, woke capital, corporate media, and beyond have already participated in the purge of their own volition and a continuation of the anti-cultural revolution of the summer 2020. It is nothing less than the weaponization of political society or civil society institutions against political dissenters in conjunction with and often indirectly supported by the state. Americans are now primed to punish their fellow Americans but for wrongthink to a greater extent than we have seen before. It will go far beyond banning the President of the United States from major social media platforms, purging countless like-minded voices and stymieing their alternative means of communication. It will go far beyond pulling a U.S. senator's publishing deal. It will go far beyond even firing people purportedly acting peacefully at political rallies. Ultimately, it will extend across every aspect of the digital world and affect real life as well. Yes, we are headed towards something like China's Great Firewall, where, albeit without the power of a government gun, big tech will silence speech that challenges the ruling class's official narratives, disappear the digital profiles of those who run afoul of its ever-changing terms of service, and take down websites where alternative ideas may proliferate. More chilling is this thought. What is it to stop the crackdown from going beyond communications to where and how you can work, bank, travel, eat, shop, obtain health insurance, and send your kids to school? Think for a second about everything you do in daily life. Consider how reliant you are on goods and services controlled by entities in whole or in part run by executives who either hate your political views or think they can survive by currying favor with those who are contemptuous. Now, the left has already said it's making this to prevent Trump administration personnel from getting jobs in the private sector. What's to stop them or their allies in the media and corporate America from doing the same to any of us? Is there any apparent limiting principle that will keep us from developing a CCP-style social credit system with Western characterizations? As my Federalist colleague Samantha Matra has put it, whereby private enterprises grade us on ideology and determine what we can and cannot do based on how closely we hew to its ideology? In a world where politics has become all pervasive, virtue signaling demands not only disavowing but punishing the 74 million enablers of what the left has been asserting for years is Nazism. As in so many other matters, they've been projecting onto the right what the left itself endorses. If you accede to the view that anything that challenges the prevailing progressive orthodoxy constitutes violence, then you will by any means necessary to stuff it out. There are an awful lot of true believers, useful idiots, cynics, and cowed people across American life seemingly willing to adhere to such a principle. It will likely push us to ideological segregation, which will only further fuel hostility, strife, and chaos. America's cold civil war will only heat up with whereas those with all the power take precisely the wrong lessons from the Capitol Hill riot and, rather than seeking to represent millions of Americans and address their concerns, simply chooses to punish or silence them. And that right there, as well as this next article, is also why I am promoting using Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution and promote a convention of the states for the purpose of proposing amendments to this current Constitution. I mean, so far there are 15 states already on board. 34 are needed for Congress to have no choice but to call the convention. And like I said, I'll get to that a little more in a later video. However, this is something that when I saw, I was like, wow, we definitely need the Convention of States for something like this. This coming from a good friend, or this coming from Red's or BizPack Review. Senator Dianne Feinstein seeking files to run again at age 91. Sparks reaction nearly everyone agrees on. Liberals apparently have gained a sudden appreciation for term limits upon the news as Senator Dianne Feinstein has reportedly filed initial paperwork to run for re-election in 2024. The oldest sitting U.S. Senator, Feinstein would be 91 when 2024 rolls around. If she won a primary, which is sure to be contested, and the general election in the deep blue state, she would be 97 at the end of the term. Although age discrimination is illegal under federal state civil rights law, the left appears intent on replacing the so-called moderate senator who supports impeaching President Trump with a full-on progressive sooner rather than later. Democrats already pressured Feinstein to step down as a ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee after her relatively polite treatment of Justice, or Judge, now Justice, Amy Coney Barrett, and praising committee chair Lindsey Graham for the way he handled the nomination hearings and even hugging him. Shortly thereafter, the left ramped up calls for her to immediately step down from Congress altogether because of the alleged cognitive decline. Parenthetically, Feinstein wasn't so nice to Barrett when the then law professor was nominated to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. You may also recall that she also nearly sabotaged Brett Kavanaugh's nomination. The initial re-election filing for Feinstein 2024 might be more about the money, however. Los Angeles Magazine cautioned, it is not unprecedented for a politician to file these types of documents, even if they do not intend to ultimately go through with the campaign. There are implications for moving funds from previous campaign war chests, or being able to fundraise now and then transfer the cash to other entities. However, Feinstein has yet confirmed that the move is purely procedural. And BizPack Review tweeted out, betrayal, maskless hug between Feinstein and Graham sends progressive outrage mob into overdrive. That from October 16, 2020. In December 2020, the left-wing New Yorker magazine, and presumably trying to grease the skids for her departure from public office, issued an anonymous source article that implied that Feinstein, who was first re-elected to the Senate in 1992, was losing it, Bradberg Review tweeted out on December 12th. Feinstein will commit to finishing term after hit piece. Claims memory loss is progressing. Speaking on background and with respect for her accomplished career, they say her short-term memory has gone so poor that she often forgets she has been briefed on a topic, accusing her staff of failing to do so just after they have, the piece read in part. Now, following the article's publication, which common sense suggests that might have been coordinated, many prominent leftists, some of them are members of the media, immediately began calling for her resignation. In December, Feinstein insisted that I don't feel any cognitive abilities have diminished. Do I forget something sometimes? Quite possibly we do. We do get things done and we do pass bills. You get older, that's true, but I've been productive. She also evidently rejected the notion of retiring early from her current term of office. Perpetually outraged, fellow Twitter is definitely not on the Feinstein re-election bandwagon. Here is just a sample. Patricia A. Smith tweeted out, "Run, she can barely walk," or from a complete sentence, "Yeah, nope." Napping Lion tweeted, "Christ Jesus, term limit, please." And at Zay Squirrel tweeted out, "Dianne Feinstein barely possesses object permanence at this point, yet has filed paperwork to run for re-election in 2024 for a 6-year term when she'll be 91. Here's that corrupt ghoul berating children, literally fighting for their futures." Sanospo1 on Twitter tweeted out, "Oh, for the love of God, this is why we need term limits." Rebecca Pierce tweeted out, "As your constituent, Senator Feinstein, you need to retire and stop being a dangerous disservice to our state." And Best tweeted out, "Feinstein is already incapable of doing her job. Time to find a primary challenger who can defeat her because this is utterly insane." Women scared Trump at Colin the Berg said, "I'm sorry, Feinstein girl, but you gotta go. I will certainly push her for whoever primaries her. We cannot have 90-year-olds in government. I don't care who you are, that's banking crazy." Lisa Hilaria Truther tweeted out, "Ugh, absolutely not. Someone please primary her." Now, perhaps one of Feinstein's constituents concluded that the lawmaker was already out of a job. This Pack Review tweeted out, "California state employee fakes Dianne Feinstein's name to steal thousands in pandemic money." Now, one of the planks in the Convention of States is limiting terms of office for all members of Congress, House and Senate, and all federal officials. I think that is a good idea, and I mean it just needs to be done. Yes, I agree. Get some fresh meat in. I mean, both benches are deep. I say limited to 12 years total. You know, 6 terms in the 6 2-year terms in the House, 2 6-year terms in the Senate, or a combination thereof. I mean it's just needed, and because I mean Feinstein's been there since my basis since I almost basically graduated from high school. I graduated high school in '93. You have Schumer's been in there long. McConnell's been there long. We've had Pelosi in the House has been in the House for a good long while. We just need to just rotate people out, bring new people in. Somebody said that we do have term limits, and that is elections. I'll ask you this. Leave your answer in the comment section below. For those who support term limits, 2 questions. 1, Do you support repealing the 22nd Amendment, which is a term limit on the president? You know, that's why we have 2 4-year terms for president and vice president. And why do you support terms at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is the White House, but you do not support term limits at the corner of East Fair Street and North Capitol Street, which is where the U.S. Capitol is? Leave your comment, leave your answer in the comment below, or in the comment section below, and, just let's engage the conversation on that. Also in the comment section, below, leave your thoughts on any of the other articles that I mentioned today, and I'll see you in the next one. Yesterday was a very historic day for America in a bad way. Yesterday was the second day the second time rather, that a sitting president was impeached. The House voting along the same along the same lines as they did last time, 231 to 197 to impeach President Trump, even though they were the same numbers. 10 Republicans joined in. And here are some takeaways from there. First, from the Daily Signal. It says 9 takeaways as 10 Republicans join Democrats to impeach Trump again. With 7 days left in President Donald Trump's term, the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives voted for a second time to impeach him, this time gaining some Republican support. The vote was 232 to 197, with 10 House Republicans joining all House Democrats. The House impeached Trump on a charge of incitement to insurrection based on a speech to a large crowd in Washington that assembled to protest Congress certifying the Electoral College vote for President-elect Joe Biden. Shortly after the president's speech, a riot broke out about a mile away at the Capitol, and hundreds broke into the building, resulting in the deaths of 4 protesters and 1 Capitol police officer. The House voted on December 18, 2019 to impeach Trump for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress in connection with the phone conversation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Senate acquitted Trump on February 5, 2020. Trump becomes the first U.S. president to be impeached twice, as well as the third president to be impeached. The others were Democrat Andrew Johnson in 1868 and Democrat Bill Clinton in 1998. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, has said he hasn't decided whether he would vote to convict Trump after a trial. In a note to fellow Senate Republicans, McConnell wrote, "I have not made a final decision on how I will vote, and I intend to listen to the legal arguments when they are presented to the Senate." McConnell announced Wednesday that the previous presidential impeachment trials lasted 83 days for Johnson, 37 days for Clinton, and 21 days for Trump won, respectively, and said there is simply no chance that a fair, serious trial would conclude before President-elect Biden is sworn in next week. The Senate will not be in session until January 19, when it will be split 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans, and will not be able to begin an impeachment trial until Inauguration Day on January 20th. So, even if there were a 2/3 Senate majority to remove Trump from office, his term would expire at noon that day. The Senate could still hold a trial, however, to determine whether to disqualify Trump from holding federal office in the future. Here are 9 highlights from the day's House of Debate, and I'll just briefly go through them. Number 1, Republican support for impeachment. Representative Dan Newhouse, a Republican of Washington, who was among the 10 GOP lawmakers to vote for impeachment, said that both political parties were responsible for not condemning violence. The other House Republicans who ended up voting to impeach the president are Liz Cheney of Wyoming, Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, John Katko of New York, Fred Upton of Michigan, Jaime Herrera Butler of Washington, Peter Mayer of Michigan, Anthony Gonzalez of Ohio, Tom Rice of South Carolina, and David Valadao of California. Newhouse cited the violent riots that occurred in his own state last summer following the death of a black man in Minneapolis police custody on May 25th. We are all responsible. My colleagues are responsible for not condemning rioters this past year, like those who barricaded the doors of the Seattle Police Department and attempted to murder the officers inside, Newhouse said, adding, others, like myself, are responsible for not speaking out sooner. Before the president misinformed and then inflamed a violent mob who tore down the American flag and brutally beat Capitol Police officers. We must do better. These articles of impeachment are flawed, but I will not use process as an excuse. There is no excuse for President Trump's actions. The president took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Last week there was a domestic threat at the door of the Capitol, and he did nothing to stop it. That is why, with a heavy heart and clear resolve, I will vote yes on these articles of impeachment. Jim Jordan, obsession that is broadening. Jim Jordan, Representative Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, noted that on January 20th, 2017, 19 minutes into President Trump's administration, at 12:19 p.m., the Washington Post headline was, "Campaign to impeach President Trump has begun. Now with just 1 week left, they're still trying." He went on to say that it's impeachment round 2, and it's always been about getting the president no matter what. It's about canceling the president and anyone who disagrees with him. The Ayatollah can tweet, but the president cannot. Democrats can object to the Electoral College results on January 6, 2017, but Republicans cannot object on January 6, 2021. Democrats say Antifa is a myth. Republicans condemn violence all the time. And it's Jordan also reminded the House that several congressional Democrats in 2017 objected to certifying Alabama's Electoral College votes for Trump, though Trump won the state comfortably. However, he said, congressional Democrats criticized Republicans for objecting to certifying the votes from Pennsylvania and saying that Americans are tired of the double standard. Democrats objected to more states in 2017 than Republicans did last week. Democrats can raise bail for rioters and looters, but somehow when Republicans condemn all the violence, somehow we're wrong. Democrats can investigate the President of the United States, well, try to investigate him for 4 years, but not look at an election that half the electorate have their doubts about. I don't know where all this goes, and it's threatening for the country. Meanwhile, one of the Democrats, Democratic Representative Jim McGovern of Massachusetts, sought to defend his vote 4 years ago. What the gentleman fails to realize is that we all acknowledge Donald Trump as the president the day after the election. McGovern of Jordan adding, coming up on this foot and talking about whataboutism and trying to make these false equivalencies. Give me a break. Pelosi said all enemies, foreign and domestic. She invoked a Republican president and Democrat president, Lincoln and Kennedy respectively, in demanding Trump's impeachment, saying that we are not motivated by partisanship. Going on to say that the President of the United States incited this insurrection, this time rebellion against our common country. He must go. He is a clear and present danger to the nation that we all love. And the president must be impeached, and she believes that he must be convicted by the Senate, a constitutional remedy that will ensure that the republic will be safe from this man who was so resolutely determined to tear down the things that we hold dear and that hold us dear. Now what Trump had to say, number 4. The president released a statement Wednesday as lawmakers debated, addressing reports of protests planned across the country before and including Election Day. In light of reports of more demonstrations, I urge that there must be no violence, no lawbreaking, no vandalism of any kind. That's not what I stand for, and that's not what America stands for. I call on all Americans to help ease tensions and calm tempers. Trump posted a conciliatory video after the vote in which he also condemned violence and vandalism committed in his name without mentioning his second impeachment. And in his speech during the Save America rally held south of the White House before the riot, the president said at one point, I know that everyone will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. And he Jordan later read the president's statement on the House floor. Criminal prosecution of Trump based on inciting an insurrection would be highly unlikely, but impeachment does not carry the same standard of proof as the criminal justice system does. Federal law defines an insurrectionist as whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto. Federal riot law includes provisions on those with intent to incite a riot, or to aid and abet any person in carrying, in inciting or participating in or carrying out a riot. Representative Randy Biggs said the impeachment vote a week before Trump leaves office is just the latest chapter of Democrats hunting the president. The craving to crush President Trump has never been satisfied, not through investigations, not through false allegations, namely through an impeachment that was wholly without merit. Biggs said of last year's Senate trial, which acquitted Trump, and the timing of this impeachment makes little sense. Democrats, he said, believe your hunger will be fully satiated by impeaching this president without completion of the full term of his office. You don't merely seek victory, but you seek obliteration of your nemesis, Biggs said. He also went on to say that that is why you seek to silence conservative voices. Your chums that sit on corporate boards of corporate America, yes, the same companies that the left vilifies, promise to stop Americans from receiving their PAC donations. But I bet that the groundswell of support for President Trump and his policies will not go away. And Biggs also talked about various Trump policy accomplishments, including strong economy, stronger military, stronger border security, before warning Democrats that their appetite will be temporarily assuaged, while they will no doubt continue to chase after leaders of this movement, but the appetite will be unfulfilled. He also urged them not to attempt to douse the remaining burning embers of this movement with gasoline, and he wanted them to please reconsider the reckless action in which they engage in today. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, Democrat Maryland, compared the January 6th attack on the Capitol to the beginning of the Civil War, attack on Pearl Harbor, and the 9/11 terror attacks. Hoyer referred to Lynn Cheney, the House's number 3 Republican, as chairwoman of the GOP conference, and has called out Trump, saying she knows of what she speaks. Cheney, by the way, is daughter of former Vice President, Defense Secretary and House Leader Dick Cheney, said Tuesday that who said she would vote to impeach Trump. And Hoyer said that the campaign said that the volume of Trump supporters last Wednesday wearing his campaign-themed red caps began emblazoned with Make America Great Again, attempting to begin MAGA Civil War on January 6. He referred to them as Make America Grieve Again. Hoyer, Pelosi's top deputy, insisted on accountability for the president, saying that there are consequences to actions, and the actions of the President of the United States demand urgent, clear action by the Congress of the United States. Guy Reckenthaler made a legal argument saying that this was a failure to meet criminal definition. With just 7 days left in President Trump's term, they're fast-tracking impeachment proceedings, a move which will no doubt further divide an already fractured nation. Even House Democrats' last impeachment effort, which was rushed in through record time, at the very least had expert input, depositions, hearings, and deliberations. This latest attempt ignores all precedent and ignores all due process, cannot be voted on in the Senate before Joe Biden is sworn into office. And there was no mention of violence, let alone calls to action. Reckenthaler said, saying, look up the criminal statute, look at the criminal code. President Trump's words would not even meet the definition of incitement under criminal statutes. The measure before us today sets a dangerous precedent whereby political parties can justify impeachment just because they don't agree with the president. Representative Adriano Espaillat, the Democrat of New York, made some of the most far-reaching allegations against Trump, outlining an intentional plan to kill public officials. He summoned and dispatched his men to kidnap and hurt many of us. He is unfit to hold office. Espaillat, a third-term lawmaker, said. He summoned and dispatched his mob to assassinate Vice President Pence, assassinate Speaker Pelosi. He is unfit to hold office. He summoned and dispatched a mob that waved the racist Confederate flag and assaulted this Capitol. And House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican California, who called the second impeachment needlessly divisive, suggested a bipartisan censure of the president would be the better path. Trump held some responsibility for the riot, McCarthy said. He also said that no investigations have been completed, no hearings have been heard. What's more, the Senate has confirmed that no trial will be held after President-elect Biden is sworn in. Impeachment vote will fan partisan flames, but that doesn't mean that the president is free from fault. He bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congressman mob rioters, because they also said that he should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding, accept his share of responsibility, quell the brewing unrest, and assure President-elect Biden is able to successfully begin his term. President's immediate action also deserves congressional action, which is why I think a fact-finding commission and a censure resolution would be prudent. Unfortunately, that is not where we are today. And there are more takeaways. This coming from the Fort Myers News Press. There are 5 takeaways. House of Representatives voted Wednesday to impeach Donald Trump for the second time, a move that drew support from a handful of Republicans. Article of impeachment was debated 1 week after a deadly riot at the Capitol on January 6. Here are some takeaways from Wednesday's impeachment proceedings. 10 presidents voting to impeach Trump, breaking ranks to vote alongside. When they voted alongside Democrats, they were Cheney, Liz Cheney of Wyoming, Representative Katko of New York, Representative Upton of Michigan, Representative Butler of Washington, Kinzinger of Illinois, Newhouse of Washington, Mayor of Michigan, Rice of South Carolina, Vallejo of California, Gonzalez of Ohio. And Cheney said in a starkly paragraph statement, everything that followed was his doing because he summoned this mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of the attack. Those words became a key argument for Democrats as they urged their Republican colleagues to join them in voting for impeachment. And her support also drew condemnation from fellow Republicans, such as Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, who called for her to step down. And interestingly enough, 4 House Republicans skipped Wednesday's impeachment vote. Kay Granger of Texas, Annie Harris of Maryland, Greg Murphy of North Carolina, and Daniel Webster of Florida. Harris, an anesthesiologist, said in a statement that he decided to take care of patients rather than vote. Murphy skipped the vote to take care of his wife, who just went through back surgery. Webster said there were family medical obligations, and a Granger spokeswoman did not respond to a request for comment. Other Republicans acknowledged Trump's wrongdoing but called impeachment divisive. And though some did split with their party, the majority opposed impeachment, and many argue that removing Trump from office will further splinter an already divided country. Representative Tim McClintock, Republican California, said Trump gave a fiery speech outside the White House before the crowd rioted in the Capitol, but he shouldn't be blamed for the lunatic fringe of his political movement. McCarthy said Trump bears some responsibility for the riot. He also said Trump should have immediately denounced the mob. He said the president should work to quell brewing unrest and ensure peaceful transition to Biden. A censure resolution would be prudent instead of impeachment, McCarthy said. Censuring the president would deliver a formal reprimand to Trump, but Republicans such as Representative Andy Biggs are opposed to that measure as well. Some House Republicans argued Wednesday that instead of impeaching Trump, Congress should create a commission to study what happened last week. Modeled after the bipartisan commission that analyzed the 9/11 terrorism attacks, the body would recommend how to prevent attacks on the Capitol. Top Republican on the House Rules Committee urged lawmakers not to move forward with a snap impeachment, saying that it would deny Trump due process. Rather than seeking to heal America, they're trying to divide us more deeply. Representative Tom Cole, Republican Oklahoma, said as the House set up rules for debate on the impeachment resolution. Democrats stressed the importance of moving swiftly. Last time Trump was impeached, it took months. Democrats said a long inquiry wasn't needed this time. Representative Zoe Lofgren of California, who has participated in all four modern impeachment investigations, said there was no need for an extensive review of the facts and evidence based on required in previous cases. What happened this time was in plain view, Lofgren said. He incited a right-wing mob of insurrections to come and overturn constitutional government a week ago. You don't need an investigation to find that out. And Pelosi quoted President Lincoln, St. Paul from the Bible, and President Kennedy in agreeing that lawmakers bear a responsibility to remove Trump's threat to the country. He must go, she said. He is a clear and present danger to all that we love. Although Trump has only days left in his presidency, House Judiciary Chair Jerry Nadler of New York said he poses a continuing threat to the nation, to the integrity of elections, and to democratic order. He must never remain in power one moment longer, Nadler said. Trump becomes first president to be impeached twice. House goes on to say that the Democrats impeached Trump in December 2019 on charges that he abused the power of his office and obstructed Congress. The Republican-led Senate acquitted him in February 2020. And Senate voted less than a year ago was far shy of the two-thirds vote needed for majority. Senator Mitt Romney of Utah was the only Republican to join Democrats in voting to convict on one of the articles. Two other presidents have been impeached, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, but Trump becomes the first to be impeached twice. No president has been removed from office. Now what comes next? The House's vote to impeach Trump is just the first step on the road to removing him from office, which would require a Senate vote to convict Trump on the charge of insurrection. The Senate probably will not convene for a trial until Trump has left office and Biden is inaugurated on January 20th. The Senate is on a recess break and is set to reconvene Tuesday, the day before the inauguration. Democrats hope to immediately move forward on a trial, but the office of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican Kentucky, called Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's office and indicated a trial would not occur until the Senate is back in session. According to Doug Andres, a spokesman for McConnell, Democrats said convicting Trump would ensure that he is unable to take office again, preventing him from running for a second time as president in 2024, as he indicated he plans to do. Democrats are reluctant to begin a trial just as Biden's term begins. Pelosi says she's reviewing the timing but hasn't announced a decision on when to transmit the article to the Senate. While McConnell controls the Senate and his schedule, Democrat Schumer of New York has floated the possibility of invoking a rarely used emergency provision that would force the Senate back in session if both leaders consented. McConnell won't consent, his spokesman said. Now, it's interesting that they're doing all of this, and what can the Senate convict Trump after he leaves office? Well, that is a question that Professor William Jacobson over illegal insurrection had answered. He says, Impeachment 2.0, no, the Senate cannot convict Trump after he leaves office. At best, supporters of both departures, Senate impeachment conviction could say that there is an argument for it, but it's complicated. Opponents merely need to point to the words of the Constitution. The U.S. House will be voting today to impeach Trump. It's a done deal because Democrats have the majority and probably will get about 20 Republicans to join them. By the way, this article was written before the vote. Then it eventually heads to the Senate for trial, where Mitch McConnell says that the earliest a trial can be held under Senate rules, unless there is unanimous consent, which will not happen. Is an hour after Biden takes office on January 20th. I have seen discussion that McConnell and Schumer could agree to an emergency session, but that would mean a quick trial in a couple of days. Not sure how viable an option that is. Here's an update. Reports indicate McConnell will not agree to an emergency session. Democrats are suggesting that the Senate could hold a trial even after Trump leaves office, perhaps as much as months later, depending on what timing Biden thought benefited his legislative agenda. The purpose would not be to remove Trump, he'd already be gone, but to preclude him from running again as part of the punishment. They also might seek to strip his lifetime salary and security stipend away. The question is, can the Senate hold an impeachment trial and convict the president after the president has already left office? I think the plain wording of the Constitution says such. Post-departure impeachment is not permitted, but there is a split of opinion. Article 2, Section 4 provides, the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. So the premise of impeachment is that it's against someone who is a president, not someone who once was a president. Also, if the purpose is removal, which cannot happen if someone already has left office. Article 1, Section 2, Section 7 provides for the remedies available in the judgment after Senate trial. Judgment in cases of impeachment should not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold an office and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States, but the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, law, judgment, and punishment according to law. So there are remedies beyond removal, but that presumes a proper conviction. It is under those other remedies that Democrats and some Republicans want more than anything, but there is nothing in the language of the Constitution to suggest that the post-conviction remedies expand the time scope of impeachment and conviction. From Appeals Court Officer Judge J. Michael Ludig writes in WAPO, it appears that even the House of Representatives impeaches President Trump this week. The Senate trial on that impeachment will not begin until after Trump has left office and President-elect Biden has become president on January 20th. That Senate trial will be unconstitutional. The Constitution itself answers this question clearly. No, he cannot be once Trump's term ends on January 20th. Congress loses its constitutional authority to continue impeachment proceedings against him, even if the House has already approved articles of impeachment. Therefore, if the House of Representatives were to impeach the president before he leaves office, the Senate could not thereafter convict the former president and disqualify him under the Constitution from future public office. Alan Dershowitz expressed a similar similar view rather, that the power of the Senate to try an impeachment vote or to try an impeachment ends when Trump leaves office. I was quoted in the New York Post, also taking that position. You can't impeach non-sitting public officials, said former NYU law professor Peter Raj Singh. Once he's left office, it's a moot situation. Cornell law professor William Jacobson agreed. Any such post-departure Senate trial would be a show trial for political purposes, not a legitimate constitutional trial, he said. Now, while Trump is the third president to be impeached by the House but acquitted, no president has ever been removed from office by a Senate conviction. So legal scholars disagree on whether an ousted chief executive could lose his pension or Secret Service protection. An argument can be made for such consequences, but that assumes a proper conviction, Jacobson said. The language does not suggest that after leaving office, impeachment could be used to strip an ex-president of his pension and continuing benefits. In December 2019, when Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz suggested former President Obama could be impeached, WAPO gathered some scholarly takes, which basically concluded that it was unclear at best. Yahoo News reports on some contrary views. No court has definitively ruled on the matter of post-presidential impeachment, but while impeachment is the exclusive method for removing a president from office, as leading conservative scholar Michael Paulson points out, nothing in the constitutional text directly limits impeachment to president office holders. In fact, as Brian Call of Michigan State University College of Law argued in a 2001 article, that impeachment was practiced in England and, unlike other aspects of English impeachment, was never explicitly ruled out in America. Indeed, some state constitutions made late impeachability explicit or even required. The possibility of punishment is key, structurally called continued. Impeachment is designed not just to remove, but to deter, and this effect would be severely undermined if it faded away near the end of the term. Convicted impeachees can be disqualified from future federal office, an important punishment that should not be automatically mooted if the officer resigns or the president removes him. They're called research paper, while superficially concluding the Senate could conduct post-departure impeachment, emphasizes its conclusion that it is uncertain. The impeachment provides a difficult problem of constitutional interpretation. It confronts an ambiguous portion of the text, which renders unclear whether the political focus of impeachment limits just the offenses and offenders who can be pursued, and whether it also restricts the timing of the proceedings as well. But the text is unclear. The history underlying it is not. And impeachment was practiced in New England, and unlike earlier aspects of English impeachment, was never explicitly ruled out in America, either in pre-1887 or 1787 state constitutions or in the federal one. Indeed, some state constitutions made late impeachability explicit or even required. Article goes on even further, so I'll leave. The link is in the description below if you wanted to take a read of it some more. But yeah, I mean, all of this is rather intriguing and interesting. So I might keep an eye on it as time develops. However, there is some other news, and in other news, apparently somebody doesn't know their First Amendment, and this coming from my good friends over at Conservative Daily News. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying that Congress must censor the media. That is a clear violation of the First Amendment. Democrat New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said Tuesday that Congress is looking into reining in our media environment to prevent the spread of disinformation. Ocasio-Cortez discussed how she feared for her life during last week's Capitol riot. In a live stream on Instagram Tuesday evening, Fox News reported a viewer asked Ocasio-Cortez if Congress is discussing truth and reconciliation or media literacy initiatives to help with healing following the turbulent events of the past few weeks, the publication reported. I can say there is absolutely a commission being discussed, but it seems to be more investigatory in style rather than truth and reconciliation. So I think that's an interesting concept for us to explore, Ocasio-Cortez said. Ocasio-Cortez noted that several members of Congress have brought up media literacy in these discussions. Tom Elliott tweeted out, AOC suggests adding media literacy as a mandate for Congressional Truth and Reconciliation Committee. We're going to have to figure out how we can rein in our media environment so you can't just spew disinformation and misinformation, she said. The New York Democrat previously suggested that lists of Trump supporters should be made and used to hold the president's supporters accountable in the future. Is anyone archiving these Trump sycophants for when they try to downplay or deny their complicity in the future? Ocasio-Cortez asked. The day before media outlets called the presidential race for Biden, I foresee a decent probability of many deleted tweets, writings, photos in the future. Liberal media figures and outlets have also previously suggested that President-elect Joe Biden should take an aggressive approach to combat conservative media when he becomes president of the United States. Journalist Glenn Greenwald predicted in October that the media will target Trump supporters even if Biden won the election, warning that Trump's presidency enabled media to elevate everybody's fear level and portray Trump as a grave threat to everything that's good in modern society. There is no question that Democrats are gearing up to use their new power to apply far more pressure than ever on Facebook, Google, Twitter, etc., to censor any views they deem threatening. Greenwald tweeted in November, referring to comments made by former President Barack Obama about controlling the internet with a combination of government regulations and corporate practices. Please look at what's going on here, Greenwald said. Democrats are defining whoever opposes them, not as adversaries, but as national security threats, fascist terrorists, etc., all to justify blocking them from the internet using their influence with Silicon Valley. The Intercept co-founder added that CNN, NBC, and The Atlantic are the outlets that are most loudly demanding that the disinformation be suppressed. Though these outlets are the ones who not only sold the bullcrap of the Iraq War, but also the last 4 years of deranged Russia took over conspiratorial insanity. They want their discourse monopoly back, Greenwald said. Same day Greenwald made these comments, Crooked Media founder Tommy Vietor published a piece titled Why Joe Biden Must Sideline Fox. Vietor lamented that Fox News is treated as a legitimate news organization and said that Biden seems to approach Fox News with eyes, not arms, wide open. Call Fox what it is, an extension of the Republican Party, Viator wrote. Say it often, repetitive messaging works. Just ask lying Ted and low energy Jeb. Reject the absurd insistence that the network has a real news division. The Crooked Media founders argue that Biden's team should give his own publication and other outlets like the nation scoops and access to help grow their audiences and influence the way Trump's team has nurtured fringe rags like Newsmax and OAN. CNN's Brian Stelter also sparked a backlash in November for compiling a list of conservative media that he claimed is spreading disinformation on the election. There is an entire constellation of websites and talk shows that are in denial, just like Trump, Stelter said, showing a list of conservative media outlets that included Fox News, The Daily Caller, Newsmax, OAN, and others. They are supplying disinformation about the election results, and wherever there's a huge supply, there is a high demand. Now, that directly goes against the First Amendment. Andrew Breitbart had said that the new media is taking over where the old media fails. This is exactly what he was talking about. As a matter of fact, the media are accusing a GOP lawmaker of insurrection just for quoting Pelosi. And that's not right either. This coming from my good friends over at the Federalist. Corporate media journalists and left-wing activists took to social media on Wednesday to spread claims that Republican Representative Louis Gohmert of Texas is in favor of inciting insurrection. Here's a quote. I just don't even know why there aren't more uprisings all over the country. Maybe there will be, Gohmert said on the House floor during the impeachment debate. Now, while Gohmert specified that what he was saying was a quote taken directly from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's previous statement encouraging uprisings, journalists and activists quickly twisted his words, publicly speculating and claiming that he was calling for increased political violence around the nation. Louis Gohmert, this in a tweet from Blake News. I don't know why there are more uprisings all over the country. Louis Gohmert calls for more violent uprisings, claims Nancy Pelosi is destroying the American experiment, and quotes the History Channel in about 2 minutes. This in a tweet from Sarah Reese Jones over at Politicus USA. Maddie Schladen tweeted out, I don't know why there aren't more uprisings over the country. Maybe there will be, Louis Gohmert says, perhaps hopefully. And Aisha Rekpana of CNN tweeted out, holy crap, is Gohmert encouraging more uprisings? Did I hear that right? Jason Applebaum over at KTVU Fox said Louis Gohmert literally asked for Trump supporters to commit violence on live TV prior to the insurrection. Why is he even there? Ezra Levin, progressive activist, wrote, Gohmert is the idea of the, or is the id of the GOP caucus. He just said on the House floor, here's a quote for you, why aren't there more uprisings all over the country? Some journalists even insulted Gohmert's intelligence, calling him dumb and incompetent. Molly Jong Fast tweeted out, I do not say this lightly, Louis Gohmert is the dumbest member of Congress. He may be the dumbest person from Texas. Bob Suska tweeted out, Louis Gohmert is the dumbest blankety blank in the history of the U.S. Congress, and we've had some numbskulls over the years. Now, during the rest of his speaking time, Gohmert also quoted Pelosi in August, saying that the domestic enemy is a voting system and honoring our constitutional right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with their allies in Congress of the United States. He also condemned the Democrats' hypocrisy on violent speech and their political attempt to remove President Donald Trump from office just a week before President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. Now the message is, if you have a whim and you want to just go after a president, go straight to the floor. No investigation, no judiciary committee, go straight to the floor. use it as a political weapon as you wish. This is so dangerous, he said. And that's that. So, I mean, it's just mind blowing and mind boggling just what all is happening within the media itself. That's why people are saying that the media is the unofficial forced branch of government, which it should not be. And I mean, we do need new media, as Patriot Soapbox says, we are the news now. We the common people are the news now. Andrew Breitbart had said many times that the new media is taking over where the old media failed. So I'll get into that more in other videos. But leave a comment below what you think of the House's impeachment of Trump. Yeah, yesterday. Also, tell me what you think about the media as a whole and your take on what Ocasio-Cortez had said, as well as your take on the First Amendment's freedom of speech. And I'll see you in the next one. Yesterday, Ben Shapiro guest hosted the Political Playbook and at Politico.com, and many people are upset about it. This coming from my good friends over at the Washington Examiner. It says Politico defends Ben Shapiro newsletter as mischief making while staff cry foul. As both readers and staff were surprised to find that conservative commentator Ben Shapiro wrote Thursday's edition of Politico's Playbook newsletter, the outlet's top editors defended the decision, arguing that publishing Shapiro's piece was in line with Politico's mischief-making business model. We have taken great care to assemble a roster of guest authors who are prominent thinkers and writers and represent a range of perspectives, Politico said in a statement. What sets Politico apart in this intense political and media moment is that we rise above partisanship and ideological warfare, even as many seek to drag us into it. It's a core value of the publication that is unchangeable and that above all protects our ability to do independent journalism. It's part of our mission. Politico editor-in-chief Matthew Kaminsky said during a phone call with staff that Shapiro was a very prominent writer, provocateur, and podcaster, and that the outlet's editors stand by every word in there. It was very closely edited, according to the Daily Beast. Politico has tapped well-known pundits and journalists to fill in as editor of its flagship Playbook newsletter, as the outlet searched for a permanent editor featuring MSNBC's Chris Hayes, CBS's Weijia Zhang, and PBS's Yamit Sindor. But staff took issue with the outlet's decision to give Shapiro a turn. One staff member said Shapiro had a long history of bigoted and incendiary commentary, and that giving him a platform after the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill by pro-Trump protesters, which left 5 dead, was in poor taste. It has clearly generated a wave of negative attention, and I fear that it's already overshadowing a lot of great work being done by journalists across this newsroom, the staffer said in the company's Slack messaging system. Others outside the newsroom took issue with the decision as well, highlighting past comments in which Shapiro said that the Palestinian Arab population is rotten to the core, and that transgender people are unfortunately suffering from a significant mental illness. Sabina Siddiqui tweeted out yesterday, I would appreciate if someone from Politico would read all of the racist things Ben Shapiro has said about Arabs and Muslims here, and then explain why they chose to give him a platform. Mischief making has always been a part of Politico's secret sauce, Kaminsky said. We were an upstart. Some of that sensibility is always going to be a part of this publication. Hours later, Politico held a Zoom meeting to hear comments and criticism on the Shapiro newsletter. At least 225 people tuned in. Eric Wemple tweeted yesterday, there are now upwards of 225 people on the Politico Zoom call, convened to hash out the decision to invite Ben Shapiro to guest write an edition of Playbook. People are very mad, I'm hearing. Shapiro told the Washington Examiner that he's completely unsurprised by the criticism. I'm completely unsurprised by the blowback, Shapiro said. In fact, I warned the editors at Politico that they would receive this kind of blowback, and to their credit, they published me anyway. The staff at Politico actually proved my point that the goal for much of the left is complete ostracization of the right from cultural and political life. The Washington Examiner reached out to Politico for further comment, and apparently there was no further commentary from Politico aside from there. But yeah, I had actually read Politico. As a matter of fact, if you check out my news briefing at rickbulow.com/blog/morning news briefing, you will if you go to my new media blog at newmedia.rickbulow.com/blog, you will see that in each and every morning news briefing, I always have the political playbook in there. As a matter of fact, let me just pull that up right now and show you just what I'm talking about here, right quick. And here we are. This is just a quick view of how I do my own news briefing. I'm subscribed to 71 newsletters, and as you can tell, and as you can see here, I have the Daily Signal. I also have the Epoch Times, which I do have an article from them in today's briefing. We're in today's video, I think, and I also have the American Minute with Bill Federer, and I have Daybreak Insider, Washington Examiner, which I just read, the Daily Wire, which admittedly is a Ben Shapiro publication. I mean, I take him with a grain of salt at times, just like I do with most of my articles here. PJ Media, Conservative Daily News, Caffeinated Thoughts, and it takes a little while. Political Playbook. I have it right here is my 25th article as my 25th newsletter in the news briefing. Today was how the Constitution could decide Trump's fate by Jeffrey Rosen, who is president of the National Constitution Center. So, my morning news briefing is very good. I'll drop a link in chat. I'll drop a link in the description below if you want to take a look at it. But it is required, well, not required, but it is recommended reading. So definitely check out my news briefings. And while we're talking about Ben Shapiro, Matt Vespa over at townhall.com had put out a very wonderful piece saying that the lib shutdown or the lib meltdown at Politico over Ben Shapiro is why the left can never use a snowflake attack on conservatives. Now, Politico isn't the friendliest publication, but they do have good writers, and at times they're not afraid to simply tell it as it is regarding Democrat politics, namely how Barack Obama let state party apparatus totally atrophy and become overtaken by the Republican Party. They've recounted how the Beto O'Rourke 2020 campaign was a total train wreck and how Kamala Harris's presidential bid came off the hinges too. Look, there are loonier lefty outlets out there. You have to read the other side. It's healthy, which I do a lot. The publication is known for their early morning newsletter called The Playbook, and this week they had a guest writer, conservative Ben Shapiro, Now, he's not the most diehard Trump supporter. In fact, he recently wrote something that many in this camp probably hated, but if there's any consolation, he triggered the liberals at Politico immensely. I mean, we're talking about a DEFCON 1 level meltdown, which prompted a 220 plus or 200 plus Zoom call of these whiny little babies just appalled that someone odious that like Ben Shapiro was able to publish under their letterhead. The horror. To its credit, though, Politico's executive staff held firm and didn't disavow the move. While the headline is ridiculous, the Daily Beast had a good summation of the Mount Vesuvius-like eruption of liberal tears that engulfed the office of the publication. Over the past several weeks, Politico filled the temporary editorial vacancy atop the playbook by inviting high-profile political reporters and commentators to author the highly influential morning political newsletter and tip sheet for Beltway insiders. The tip sheet in recent weeks has been authored by well-known TV hosts like MSNBC's Chris Hayes, as well as reporters like CBS's Rita Zhang, PBS's White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, and the Washington Free Beacon's editor-in-chief Eliana Johnson. NBC's Meet the Press host Chuck Todd is expected to co-author or guest author the playbook in coming weeks. But on Thursday, Politico turned the newsletter over to Shapiro, who used the space for a column making the case that the House Republicans who voted against impeaching Trump, despite his 2020 lies about despite his repeated lies about the 2020 election and his stoking of rioters, who stormed the Capitol in his name last week, are right to feel aggrieved. If you supported Trump in any way, then you were at least partially culpable, the argument goes. It's not just Trump who deserves vitriol, it's all 74 million people who voted for him, Shapiro wrote. Further claiming opposition to impeachment comes from a deep and abiding conservative belief that members of the opposing political tribe want their destruction, not simply to punish Trump for his behavior. Internally at Politico, several staffers raised concerns about the decision to allow him to guest write the key newsletter. Even for a day, one staffer pointed out in a company-wide Slack channel that the right-wing pundit has a long history of bigoted and incendiary commentary, making it especially inappropriate to elevate him in the wake of last week's violent attack on the Capitol by rioters, who critics say have been radicalized for years by the fiery rhetoric of right-wing media stars like Shapiro. It's clearly generated a wave of negative attention, and I fear it's already overshadowing a lot of great work being done by journalists across this newsroom, the staffer added. The comment received several dozen votes from political colleagues. This is especially confusing given the newsroom's welcome efforts over the last year to cover issues related to race in a more intentional, elevated, thoughtful way, another staffer responded. Eric Rumpel tweeted out, just chatted with a pair of political staffers who dissent from the prevailing outrage over the Ben Shapiro guest hosting gig. They say they didn't speak up on the call because the sentiment is so heated and one-sided. Rumpel also tweeted, one staffer in today's meeting, Politico, over the Ben Shapiro guest written playbook, argued that the decision to publish his thoughts complicates frequent conversations with Republicans and conservatives. Another Rumpel tweet says there are now upwards of 225 people on the Politico Zoom call. Convener hash out the decision to invite Ben Shapiro to guest read in addition to playbook. People are very mad, I am hearing. Rumpel also tweeted out, Politico has released a statement on the backlash against using Ben Shapiro as a guest writer for playbook. It says we rise above partisanship and ideological warfare. Greg Price tweeted out thoughts and prayers to the staff of Politico in this difficult time. Stephen L. Miller said JFC, what a bunch of babies. And Katie Pavlich tweeted out, this meltdown over regular Trump critic Ben Shapiro and Politico is amazing and again proves the left want 100% compliance and that their demands for one ideology go way beyond Trump. Also, I have news, there are more conservatives lined up to guest that playbook this week. This is why the left will never be able to successfully hurl the snowflake attack back at conservatives. Only we can do it because we don't think differing opinions are acts of violence. We're not that insane. Oh, for sure, liberals try to hurl the snowflake attack, but they feel miserably at it. A statue of Abraham Lincoln is defaced. Conservatives are outraged and liberals shout snowflake as if it's popular to deface our greatest president. It's nonsense. The erasure of our history is something to be outraged about. A conservative writing an opinion piece is hardly equivalent. It's nothing more than the tantrums of the white liberal who, after taking American studies at some communist college, think they are the ones who are entrusted with protecting so-called vulnerable communities, especially non-whites. The irony is that A, no one in these communities asks them to help, B, they always overreach, and C, because of points A and B, it's the grossest exercise in white privilege. It's paternalistic as well. Who did it and made you the BIPOC police? This epic tantrum goes into the annals of the privileged white liberals and their plight, which is going to be a circus that lasts the next 4 years, isn't it? Julio wrote that the Daily Wire, the publication that Ben Shapiro co-founded, will be delivering leftist tears tumblers to the political staff. They've earned them. And that, I mean, I'm thinking that that is so definitely very true there. I mean, it just goes, to me, it just goes to show the difference between conservatives and liberals, right and left. You know, liberals operate under the Soloninsky playbook, of division. As a matter of fact, Alinsky's Rule 13, if I'm not mistaken, is pick the target, freeze it, and then polarize it. Meaning, just stick to that one topic. They do that a lot. Now, at, now, at the beginning of February is Andrew Breitbart's birthday. I'm going to do something on this, on the, in a video commemorating one Andrew Breitbart. Back in 2013, I had done a series of editorials for my then Red, White, and Blue blog, centered solely around Andrew Breitbart and his pragmatic primer for realistic revolutionaries to combat Saul Alinsky's 13 Rules for Radicals. Stay tuned for that. But, that right there just goes to show the vitriol that is seen basically in this country toward free speech. And and like I said, I'll get to that a little later. But there is some other news here. Last week, Twitter and Facebook had deplatformed President Trump. Well, it's coming to bite them in the butt. This coming from the Epoch Times. Twitter and Facebook have 51 billion with the B dollars combined market value erased since the Trump ban. And social media giants Facebook and Twitter have collectively seen $51.2 billion in combined market value wiped out over the last two trading sessions since they banned President Donald Trump from their platforms following the U.S. Capitol breach. Large tech firms and a number of Democrat political figures have claimed Trump incited violence at the U.S. Capitol on January 6. The incident disrupted debates in both the House and Senate as lawmakers were forced to shelter in place, while police and security attempted to regain control. Trump took to Twitter following the outbreak of violence to call on protesters to go home in peace. He denounced the violence as a heinous attack that defiled the seat of American democracy on January 7th. It is unclear who instigated the breach of the building. Last week, Twitter first placed restrictions on a video that the president posted, then temporarily suspended his account. Facebook followed suit shortly thereafter. Twitter 2 days later permanently suspended Trump's account, saying it was due to two Twitter posts having violated its policies. A large number of pro-Trump accounts were also deleted by Twitter and Facebook, as users attempted to flee to Parler and other social media websites. Amazon Web Services suspended its service with Parler on January 11th, triggering a lawsuit from the company hours later. Most recently, Google's YouTube removed new content from Trump's account and suspended his channel for at least a week, saying that the channel violated its policies for inciting violence. After careful review and in light of concerns about the ongoing potential for violence, we removed new content uploaded to the Donald J. Trump channel and issued a strike for violating our policies for inciting violence, a YouTube spokesperson said in a statement to the Epoch Times. As a result, in accordance with our long-standing strike system, the channel is now prevented from uploading new videos or live streams for a minimum of 7 days, which may be extended. We are also indefinitely disabling contents under videos on the channel. We've taken similar actions in the past for other cases involving safety concerns. Now, Google didn't have any further comment when asked about what aspects of the content on Trump's channel had violated its policies. The president has argued that companies such as Google, Twitter, and Facebook will fail due to censorship. Big tech is doing a horrible thing to our country, and I believe it's going to be a catastrophic mistake for them, Trump said. And as I had mentioned many times in the past, not only, I have many accounts on many. Well, I have an account with many other social media companies uh, on the web, and you can go to my contacts thing. I have the link down below if you want to check that out. And yeah, so it's interesting as to what's happening with that. As a matter of fact, James O'Keefe of Project Veritas had just has a whistleblower that leaked video of Dorsey telling staff that the actions will be much bigger than the Trump ban. Got this coming from FoxNews.com. Twitter whistleblower leaks video of Dorsey telling staff actions will be much bigger than Trump ban. A leaked recording of Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey suggests that the company's policy enforcement actions will go far beyond banning President Trump. The right-wing guerrilla news outlet Project Veritas released a clip on Thursday given to them by a purported Twitter insider whistleblower who secretly recorded remarks by Dorsey to staff. You should always feel free to express yourself in whatever format manifestation feels right, Dorsey said in the clip. Dorsey, who recently addressed a controversy over his company's decision to permanently suspend the president, told staff in a virtual meeting that Twitter will do a full retro that will take some time, but drew focus to the platform's former high-profile account. We know we are focused on one account right now, but this is going to be much bigger than just one account, and it's going to go on for much longer than just this day, this week, and the next few weeks, and go on beyond the inauguration, Dorsey said. So the focus is certainly on this account and how it ties to real-world violence, but also we need to think much longer term around how these dynamics play out over time. I don't believe this is going away anytime soon. Dorsey then referenced actions taken against QAnon conspiracy theorists as a part of a recent purge of Twitter accounts, telling staff as part of a much broader approach that we should be looking at and going deeper on. You know the U.S. is extremely divided. Our platform is showing that every single day, Dorsey later said, and our role is to protect the integrity of that conversation and do what we can to make sure that no one is being harmed based off that, and that is our focus. Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe teased Thursday that more leaks from Twitter may come, saying we've had over a dozen people reach out to us this week with video evidence inside Twitter. Stay tuned, O'Keefe told viewers. They may be private companies, but they have more power than all three branches of government. A Twitter spokesperson told Fox News, the remarks shown in the video were delivered to our more than 5,400 employees, and they're nearly the same words Jack shared in a recent tweet thread, offering context around and reflections on our work to protect the conversation in recent weeks. On Wednesday, Dorsey defended Twitter's decision to permanently suspend President Trump's account, saying there was the right decision. He did acknowledge, however, that taking such actions fragment the public conversation, divide us, and limit the potential for clarification, redemption, and learning. He also admitted that the power of his corporation in the global public conversation has set a dangerous precedent. In a recent interview on Hannity, O'Keefe told the host that in this time of moral and political crisis, I think courage is contagious and we have all these whistleblowers coming to us, insiders helping us expose. We need more of these people, O'Keefe added. Right now, I think it's a time to be hopeful if we can create an army of exposers, because exposure itself Sunlight needs to be the best disinfectant. Exposure itself is the solution. And there's this article also from Red State. Project Veritas drops a video on Twitter CEO Jack talking about Trump and what is to come. Yesterday, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey wrote a long Twitter thread trying to justify his banning of President Donald Trump from the platform, as well as the actions taken against some other people on the right. He found out that after his actions, Twitter stock went right in the dumper, taking a huge plunge. No doubt his board said something like, "Clean this up." In his thread, he argued that they were trying to focus on public safety. They're just suppressing things for your safety, but people weren't buying his justification. Now, as we've seen, Twitter immediately shut off a critical story in October that Joe Biden had lied about never having met with his son's foreign business partners, even suspending the New York Post and preventing the URL to the story they had on the Biden scandal from being spread on Twitter. Jack later had to admit that there was no violation of the terms of service. But in the meantime, a troublesome story for Biden was suppressed. But when Democrats spread actual conspiracies or things that might impede public safety, their tweets don't seem to get the same attention. But now, Project Veritas has a whistleblower video on Jack Dorsey from a source inside Twitter. James O'Keefe tweeted out yesterday, breaking Twitter insiders secretly record CEO Jack, detailing agenda for further political censorship. We're focused on one account, that being real Donald Trump right now, but this is going to be much bigger than just one account, and it's going to go on for much longer than just this one day, 1 week beyond the inauguration. But he said they needed to consider the dynamics and how this plays out over time. I don't think this is going away anytime soon. Oh, how nice to hear. Just how long does he expect to put a clampdown on Twitter? Americans are curious, because this video sure sounds like he's putting the hammer down and doesn't expect it to let up anytime soon. How much suppression is he planning on for our own good, of course, for the children? The video already has over 1.5 million views. Guess how Jack greeted it? He put a sensitive label on the video. James O'Keefe tweeted out today, actually, breaking Twitter has labeled Project Veritas' hashtag exposed Twitter release of Jack, detailing the company's agenda and continuing their political censorship as sensitive content. This further validates the release. Yes, I'm guessing that Jack is probably a little sensitive about it. Otherwise, would TOS justify putting a sensitive label on it? The fact it makes Twitter look bad? A Twitter person tried to spin it right away, but James O'Keefe shot that right down. Twitter VP of Global Communications responds. Jack, with Bannon, where in Jack's tweet did he say the political censorship is going to be much bigger than one account, and it's going to go on for much longer than just this day, this week, and the next few weeks? That in a tweet from James O'Keefe, pretty hard to deny, Jack and Bannon. And it sounds like Project Veritas may have more coming when it comes to Twitter. So Jack might just want to listen up. I mean, that is basically some powerful stuff there, so I'm definitely keeping my eyes on it, and I'll keep you guys updated as well. But let me know in the comments below what you think about the Project Veritas Insider. Also let me know what you think about any of the articles that I've spoken about today. And I'll see you in the next video. And that's going to do it for the news for this week. I am Mick Bulow. Again, if you like what you watch, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. Also subscribe and tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell an enemy or two even. And I will be back next week. Until next time, peace.